So let's continue our exploration of our reality and continue to examine the evidence of buildings being melted and damaged by some type of X factor event. Let's continue to look at the evidence on how the old world, highly advanced civilization, was wiped out by some event. I like to call what you see here a pocket of survival. What you see is the top of the building is over here is coming down on this building. This building here, it's being melted by this building, and it's hot melted lava rock that's flowing onto it. It's getting hot. It's eating up this building. This building's getting hot itself. This building is completely mangled and hot. It's gonna be a rocky mountain is all that's left. But thankfully, the heat stopped real fast, and we're able to see what the building looked like before it was turned into a rocky-looking mountain. So you have these mountains here, but they're really melted buildings. And again, more melted buildings. You have little pockets of survival that allow us to see that these were buildings and what they looked like before. The concrete was just dripping and forming a rock curtain, one after the other, concealing itself behind the rock curtains. So we can't tell that it was a building. But you can see the arches here, the columns, everything. And you can see how it has melted over itself, concealing that it was a building before all of this happened. As you notice, the vegetation likes to grow out of the old, softer sand of the liquid building. Areas that were melted hot like lava before were thoroughly cooked, and it's nice and loose for the roots. And as you can see here, the domes of these buildings completely melted like ice cream. Very nice columns here, though. All vegetarian concrete molds were jacked. And again, look how small these people are here. I mean, look how small they are. And look at the doorway. Look at the door. I mean, you gotta be kidding. Look at the window. Look how big that window is. You gotta be kidding me. Look at the door and the window. And look how small he is. He's supposed to be up here. Looking out the window up there. You look out the window about right there in the window. And then you want to walk in right up in here. Grab the handle. All this liquid building is melted hot like lava. All the building has been melted, but we have a pocket of survival here that lets us know what it looked like. And then you can see the damage coming up the wall from the hot melted liquid lava that was at the X Factor event. During the X Factor event, this was all hot lava. And you can see the heat damage from the bottom, how it's mangled the bottom columns and so forth from the heat. And then the top, you can see where it was viscous and pulling apart, separating and forming holes. And again, down here, you see what's left of what all of it used to look like. You see the tops of the buildings here. You see the melting. You see it flowing, the A-frames, and you see it completely covering itself, except for this little portion here that it, luckily for us, it didn't cover, and we can see what it looked like before. That's how we know it's buildings. There it is. That's what it used to look like. Again, here, you have the buildings coming over itself, melting, hiding and concealing itself with rock curtains. See how you would have never known that was a building there? See the building down here getting covered? See this getting covered? It's all being covered and melted and hot from the bottom here as well. And this is a pocket of survival. That's what the entire thing used to look like. That's how we know it was a building and not a mountain. And it's a damaged heat damaged buildings. And again, you have heat damaged buildings melted at the top, forming rock curtains. It's all melted. It's incredible. Columns, arches. And again, down here, look at the arches and the columns. It was all buildings turned into sand and mud. Literally turned into sand and mud, except for some of the structure of it. It didn't. And then this is all up here, a pocket of survival. Excuse me. All this was melting. See how it's flooded? It's all flooded and it's melted. It's in its own liquid melted because all this was building and it's flooded. This is a building here. See how it melted out there? This was all liquid hot and it got cooked and like a liquid building lava. And again, look down here on the left. You have columns, you have arches, you have domes, and you have holes where it was pulling apart because it was viscous. Again, you can see the brick lines here. You can see that was all a building before it was completely heat damaged. Just incredible damage. Look at the rock curtain concealing that was a building. Again, look at the doorways, the arches. This building is completely melted and mangled and dripping and flooded in hot liquid lava. All the concrete molds are melted and mangled and scorched. The damage is compelling. And look at all the buildings here and the brick lines. You see brick lines after brick lines, pancaked brick lines, tops of the buildings. All that was hot liquid flowing. All the heat from the bottom is forming A-frames. All the heat's coming up. You can clearly see windows, arches, brick lines. All these were buildings, towers, domes. You can clearly see these are damaged buildings. And they're everywhere all over the flat plain, the world. Another pocket of survival here. All the building around it is melted and has maintained this so we know what it used to look like. And again, look at the heat from the bottom. Again, what happened is all this during the X Factor event was hot like a flowing hot liquid lava. And it got to where it was coming in and out up on the wall here. And it would melt it. See the viscousness, how hot it was. And this is a pocket of survival. See how it was pulling apart, separating from the heat and melting. And we have a pocket of survival here. This is how we know what the whole thing used to look like before it got damaged. And again, arches, columns, and it's just completely melted all the way up the side of the building and flooded in its own liquid mess. See the brick lines here. What you can see is this was all a building, but it's been melted and heat damaged. Again, this was all a building, and it's been literally covered and submerged by the building is just covering it and submerging it. And for the most part, you would never know that was there because it would look like that. But it didn't cover itself enough. And this is how we know what it used to look like. It's a pocket of survival. It was a building. And again, I don't know what. Again, they had this building. There's a dome here. It's a dome, but it's like a face on like a sphinx or something. These are all brick lines. Again, this building has been turned into mud. It's just been liquefied. You can see clearly the brick lines. You can see that this is in a shape of a human head and a sphinx animal body. A building made to look like a sphinx. And again, look at the domes, towers of the domes, and the buildings all around have melted down. And this is, and then it hardened and caught itself in between these two buildings that have been moving from the ground, moving and being viscous and melting hot from the grid meltdown. And it hardened back up and caught this self in between here and hardened again. See the melting here and it hardened again. Just incredible from the X Factor event. And again, if you can just think back to the X Factor event, and you'll see all this is hot, flowing like a liquid lava. It's all flooding itself. This is flooded. This is way taller. And again, look, watch. It overflowed into here. See, some went this way, some went down here. This is coming around, flowing down and down this way. So, dude, you got the arches. This is all from the whole world. This is a pocket of survival, submerged in its liquid building that's submerged. This is all brick lines, and this is a building up here that got damaged by the X Factor event as well. And again, on the left here, you can see the damage. Turned the building into that, like, mud. And then this building here is turned into mud, and the top of it's sticking up. It's all was flowing in hot liquid building. All that building, all those buildings back there have been melted down into mud. And again, look at this building. It just started expanding. As soon, excuse me, as soon as the side of this building got hot enough, as soon as it became viscous and gave way from a solid state to a liquid state, it swells out, it balloon rocks, it marshmallows. And then it hardened again. It separates, forms these holes. But you can still see the brick lines of the building. People think they built on top of this and carved it on a mountain. This is a damaged building, okay? Turned into what you call mountains. Again, that was all melted building. Look at the brick lines here. Again, all mountains are melted buildings. Look at that. Look at it. That was buildings. And again, look, melted buildings. They think these are cliffs. This is a building here that got damaged by heat. See the window here? See the brick? This was all perfect red brick. It's all black and heat damage. There's the top of it with the antenna and the helmet. They had these wireless looking helmets. Same with that look just like that on the buildings too. This towers to the dome technology. Look what happened to that building there. Look at the doorway. And again, this building just completely, it just melted. It's just all completely flooded and melted in its own liquid hot mess. Top of buildings here. The reason you have gorges and gullies and gorges and all that, that's in between buildings. These are buildings here. See the A-frame, see how it's floating, melted down. See how it melted down here? Everything is hot, melted buildings, melted down by the grid. Totally damaged by the X Factor event. Again, all this was buildings, and it melted down over itself, forming rock curtains, and we have little pockets of survival. Nobody carved that in there. It's buildings that damaged, and it's been covered and melted up and hardened up like rock and concrete, because that's what it was. And you can clearly see the tops of the buildings that they continue to live in, that didn't get completely damaged, like the bottom here. Pockets of survival. That's how we know that it was all buildings, that all mountains were buildings. They're melted buildings. All mountains are melted buildings. Again, look at the brick lines, how it just sank into the ground and liquefied. Again, you clearly have brick lines, pancake brick lines, domes, brick lines, wavy brick lines. What's left? Pocket of survival of this damaged building. Pocket of survival. It's melting over itself. It's forming a rock curtain. It's melting. It's coming over itself, covering it up. But it stopped, and you can see what it all used to look like before it melted on itself. Again, same here. These are all buildings here. You have the openings, the arches, the doorways. It's all formed rock curtains and melted on itself. Pocket of survival. All melted buildings. Rock curtains melting over itself. All melted buildings. All melted buildings. Pocket of survival. Somehow this didn't melt like the rest of it. It survived. But that's how we know what it used to look like. Look at all the damage here. Look at the columns. This was all a beautiful building, and look at it now. Again, you can literally see the red brick melting into the concrete. Molds that go over the red brick. Look at the brick lines here. Look at the arches. Look at the. This is all melted buildings, damaged by the X Factor event. And look how it came and melted. Again, so all this was liquid flowing hot, like lava. And it flowed around and down this. And that's how it survived. But all this flowed over that, damaging everything else. And when it densified, you get these thoroughly cooked fine grains of sand. Desert. Pockets of survival. Look at the tops. Look at the roof here. Brick roof. Concrete molds. Columns. It's a melted building. Completely melted by the X Factor event. All red brick melted. Columns down here. It was all melted over this building. And it didn't melt all the way over the rest of itself. It just didn't melt the rest of the way. And that's how we know what it looked like. Same here. Melting over itself, and it stopped and hardened real fast for some reason. Possibly that intense lack of energy from two suns to one sun, excuse me. Used to having two suns, and now you only have one. Boom, it just freezes in midair and hardens that concrete. And again, you got the buildings, A-frames, and then the buildings and the towers just completely look like they were submerged in some hot flowing liquid building lava, and it thoroughly cooked them into dirt and mud. And this is absolutely some of the best evidence ever, folks. You have the building melting over itself, and it just didn't melt all the way over itself here. It maintained, see the arch here? See that it's melting over itself here? See it just completely melting. You would never know that that was a building. It's consuming itself. It's quite incredible evidence here. That was all a building, and you can literally see it melting like a wave, like a landslide, except it's melted building and lava. I mean, melted building that flows like lava. And again, look at the heat damage here. It just explodes, and balloon rocks out, marshmallows out. When it becomes liquid, it just expands from that heat expansion, and then it hardened again. Here we go, pocket of survival. The building completely melted except for this part of it from the X Factor event. Same with that. It was all hot, lava, melted building around it. Thoroughly cooked everything from the heat. But somehow a little bit of it survived because of this wall here or something. Kept out, and it only came up this high on the building here. Look at how it just melted over itself here, forming rock curtains. Look at the melting. It just melted the concrete. Just completely melted the concrete. Look at the heat from the bottom here. Just completely melted the brick, red brick. Completely melted it. And the heat came up from the bottom here, mangling this red brick tower. Look what it did to it. Again, they're going to be like, oh, they built on top of this rocky mountain here. How? How? It's clearly damaged. Look at it. They didn't build on top. It was there and it got damaged. You can see the incredible damage here. And where it's not level, most anywhere, if it's not perfectly level and flat, it's probably your unmelted liquid building that hardened back up again. Here we have some red brick here that's all been melted into liquid building. And when it cooled down and densified, it looks like this mud and sand. But it was all liquid building. I don't know about that. That could have been like that looks like some water flow there, but who knows. But here, look at this. Check out what it did. Again, more evidence of how it turns these buildings. It's all liquid building. It turns the building into that like a mud. It looks like a mud flood, but it's not. It's the entire building is submerged in liquid building. Up this high. Look at this submerged in liquid building. Look, it cooked the building underneath itself. It cooked itself. Look what it did to the red brick there. Again, if it's not level, other buildings around it got melted and hot and flowed around these other buildings. And that's what it looks like. It looks like a mud flood, but it's these buildings that literally melt, and then they start to flow around and flood other buildings. You see it over and over again. Buildings getting melted and flooding on other buildings. Or themselves around themselves. And look how it cooks it. From the heat. Look how it cooks. Literally cooks it. From this hot liquid melted building that it was submerged in. Looks like a mud flood now, but it was all melted liquid building. Flowing. Look at that. Flowing in between buildings. Liquid building. Flowing. Submerging and flooding. Buildings everywhere. And then it cools off and densifies. And you get this. Looks like a mud flood. Look. Horses. Using horses. And again, look. All liquid melted building. They're taking it away to clean up the flooding of the liquid melted building mess. See how it flooded on this side here? Came down this way and scorched the color out of the red brick here. Oh my, look at that. Liquid building flowing. And again, the building was turned into what looks like a mud flood, but this is all buildings. Look at the brick lines. Look at the A-frames from the melting. All melted and then flooded by itself. And again, let's really take a good gander here. What you see here is it's being flooded here by this hot liquid melted building all the way around. It's kind of being flooded a little bit. But then on top it's melting down from the top into what looks like mud. But they're calling this a mud flood. Like, how'd the mud jump to the top? No, the top of the building's melted and it's turned in to what looks like mud. See the brick lines and the arches and the windows and door openings? This is all building, brick lines, turned into mud by the X Factor event. And again, check out this building here. What's left of it at the top that didn't get turned into mud. But it was all hot liquid building, lava. And it thoroughly cooked the building, and it cooked it into this. When it densified real fast, it wasn't cooked in enough into rock, and it was still moist, and it looks like mud. And there it is. Look, melting from the top as well. It's not mud. Mud flood didn't miraculously fly up to the top of the building here. It's melted buildings that looks like mud now. Look, again, look at this building. This is a building damaged and melted. Look at the melting coming down around it. You can see it, what it used to look like before it got melted and turned into this mud. It got turned into this. This was a gorgeous building. Look at the dome and And again, look at this one. Again, this building is literally turned into mush and mud. It's nothing left but sand, mud, and mush. But this was a building. This is absolutely a building. Liquefied. Look, this is a building completely liquefied. As you can see, it's melting out this way. But this building, you can still see it before it melted it and cooked it into this mush. Right now, it's literally cooking any solids. It's cooking them into a liquid right now at this point, and then until it densified and stopped real fast so we could see this. Again, red brick getting melted and flowing. You got all this was hot. Buildings, look at the buildings turned into mud and dirt and sand because it was all liquid hot. Look at the brick here. Look what it did to the brick. That was all red brick. That was all red brick. You can see the brick. It cooked it into mud and dirt because all that was all hot like lava. Again, you can see it melted and flowing. Look, it's all melted. It's a melted mush. Everything is melted building. Excuse me. So here, you completely see damage all the way up on this pyramid. You see it liquid building melted all the way around it, completely hot. And liquid melted building. Looks like a mud flood. You can see the buildings here, how they have been overrun and flowing down, forming these rock curtains over the building behind it. You could still see some of the building, but either way it melted it all. All the building has been completely melted up by the heat from that flowing liquid building, all flowing outward and being melted. All building being melted and liquefied, turned into dust, dustified. Look at the arches and brick lines and columns, and this is what happened to a lot of the buildings. It's not a mud flood. These buildings have been turned into this rock and mud and dirt and sand, and these were buildings. Look at it. Look at the brick here. It was all red brick, and it's been melted, submerged in hot liquid building. Look at the flow. Look at the flow. Look at the damage to the buildings. Look at the top of the buildings and how it melted down and out over other buildings. And then it somehow left some of these buildings around, even though it pretty much didn't leave much. But you could see that those were buildings there, and it's just turning everything into that. You can see that you could just completely see the building brick line there. It's pretty easy. Window line there, columns and arches there. The place has been completely flooded. Windows there of a building, what's left of it. It's all damaged. Everywhere you look when you do the research and you have the eyes to see, everywhere is damage and destruction of some old world, highly advanced civilization wiped out by some X Factor event. Here it is. These were all beautiful buildings from a highly advanced civilization, and here they are, melted like ice cream, turned into dirt and sand. Pocket of survival. Talk about a real oasis. Again, it's come down and flooded all around this little building here and kept a little oasis of survival. A pocket of survival. Look at the grid, how it looks like a grid. And look at how soft and smooth it is from all the melting and flooding. A-frames. Again, see the melting. It looks like it forms these A-frames. Incredible evidence. Look at the melting. Just incredible melting. All flowing like ice cream this way. Just amazing. Absolutely amazing. Look at that. Just in huge structures here. Columns. Huge. Melted like ice cream. You can see where it flowed and which way it was flowing. And then here you can see the wave. It was flowing that way, coming onto the grain here. Coming onto the grain here, flowing onto it. Flowing. Look, a little oasis. That got submerged, though, and damaged and cooked from the hot liquid melted building at the time. And again, this was all perfect red brick. Look what happened to the brick. Looks like mud to me. Cooked into mud. Cooked. Thoroughly cooked. All this. Look at the melted red brick. It thoroughly cooked these buildings. It thoroughly cooked them good. Look at that. It cooked it into blocks there. Look at the damage. Look at the arches of red brick here. Look at the flowing and the A-frames and the damage. And you can still see the red brick and how it was liquid hot during the X Factor event. Red brick melted hot, damaged, completely melted the red brick. And here's the red brick with some white exterior concrete finish. How it melted for the most part. And here, all this building is liquefied and melted. You can see the melting. You can see the flow. Brick lines here. Look at what's left of this building. It looks like it's been just submerged in hot liquid building and cooked into this mud when it densified. Look, these are all tops of buildings. Melted. Look at the brick lines and the arches. Look at the melting. Look at the A-frames. Wow, look at that melting. Wow, you can see really see the flow and how it was melting and became smooth in certain areas. Look what happened to that red brick. Melted. Melted. Look at the brick lines. Look at the melting. And again, this isn't melting, but again, when these buildings, after the X Factor event ceased and cooled off, some of these buildings were just cooked, and they haven't settled, and they're just cooked into this loose sand, and they haven't settled, and they start to settle and flow, and they landslide, and that's how you get these mudslides, landslides, earthquakes, etc. It's all unsettled buildings. All of that. Everything I said is unsettled buildings. And again, look, this is all liquid hot buildings submerging itself. And another leaning tower of Pisa because the ground got hot. The grid got hot, melted, and it leaned over. You can see how the red got cooked down that way thoroughly. Domes, brick lines, buildings submerged in hot. Again, look, this is all brick lines of buildings, and look what it got cooked into. It got cooked into this mud. Looks like mud, but that's all buildings, melted buildings. It's all melted buildings. It was viscous separating, forming these holes here. All melted buildings. Everywhere you look, flooded by other melted buildings. Red brick, everywhere you look. Melted buildings, flooded by other melted buildings. Melted buildings, flooded by other melted buildings. And again, look, you can tell that's the building. It has the same dome, how it comes up to the dome, brick lines, towers. It's got it all. It's all of buildings. All melted buildings. And again, look what happened to the red brick here. Look at this window here. This used to be a window. There's the arch. Look what it did to the red brick in the building. It turned it into that. Look what it did to the red brick. It melted it and expanded out all the bricks. Turned it into, look at the flow here. Look at the damage here. Look at the mudslide here. Landslide, because it's all loose, unsettled, melted buildings. Look, it's all melted buildings, loose, and it's unsettled. Everywhere you go, you're on liquid, you're on loose, unsettled, melted buildings. Everywhere you go. Look, see what happens to each and every one of these buildings, how they landslided out. Everyone, almost everyone landslided out. It's all loose. It's all melted buildings, unsettled. You got to be careful what you're doing when you build. Look at all this is unsettled. Look how it landslided. Unsettled, melted buildings. And I've been here. Bishop's Castle. Lived on this mountain before. Towers, domes. It's all melted and submerged in itself. Other liquid buildings. The red brick's been completely cooked into, looks like stone. It's from the old world. And this was all flowing down up to the window here. And this is all melted, flowing. And again, there's a whole section coming on how a lot of these buildings got turned into crystals. Look, see, this was all flowing, melted red brick buildings, and it got crystallized. And we'll get into all that. It's a lot of stuff. And here you can really see the orange and the black scorch marks and the melting. You can really see the brick lines of the buildings damaged and melted here and overflowed on itself. It's all melted buildings everywhere. Had a grid meltdown. Look at the flowing when it was viscous and hot. And then it hardened back up into rock again, because that's what it was. It's all melted buildings. And again, here you can see how it's melted around pyramids. All melted around and flooded by melted building. Again, that's somebody on a bike coming down a building here. On a bike. It's insane. But this is all melted buildings. And again, look. You got this hot, charred black melting here. Turned into stone. But this was all melting out that way. And then you got buildings here. All this building got hot and turned into this mud. There's a person right there. There's a window. Brick lines. Completely square buildings mangled by the X Factor event. Mangled by the X Factor event. Look at the brick lines. This is amazing here. To see all these buildings melted here like this. You can see all these different brick lines. And then you can see how it's just... Whoops. I didn't mean to do that. You can see how it's just melted and flowing. It was hot. I accidentally grabbed that. Now will you work, please? Thank you. And this is just fantastic here. What you see is this building was flowing and melting this way. And layer by layer, it would, as you can see here, it collects layer after layer. A rock curtain would flow like lava, but it's melted building. It's concrete. As you can see, it's just concrete. It got hot. It's all melted building. Layer after layer, it would collect and build up. You could walk under that curtain right there. It's a literal concrete rock curtain. Look at all the layer. Notice how it flowed layer after layer over itself here. Can you see this? evidence of it flowing over itself, layer after layer here, and hardening back up into concrete, because that's what it was. All liquid hot melted buildings, a grid meltdown. See the flowing liquid building, looks like a mud flood, looks like a circuit board on a motherboard of a computer. All liquid building melted. All melted. Pocket of survival here. It melted all around this area, oasis, a literal oasis. Notice the red brick underneath, and then it's been upgraded and updated with concrete molds attached over it. But all around it, melted hot building. And again, look what happens. This was all liquid hot melted building. Look what happened to the concrete and brick. And again, all this was hot liquid building, and it flooded all around this building and did not get into this part of the building here. See the arches here? And again, you still see the buildings loose, unsettled, and they landslide. And again, this is completely building. It's liquid and melting down and around this building this way, flowing down this way, and being flooded by hot. It's a pocket of survival, beautiful arch here, little people here. All this is building getting flooded in hot liquid building. Cooked, melted, submerged. Notice it's all melted buildings. Flooded. Again, all this completely melted. It looks like mud, but it's just melted. Melted. Look, melted. See the brick lines here? All building after building. Melted. And see this flowed? It was flowing, and then it hardened back up into concrete, because that's what it is. But it was flowing. All this was flowing liquid concrete, and then it hardened back up. It cooled off, hardened up, densified, and there it is. That's concrete. That was flow. You could see it's flowing concrete. And again, all this was flooded by itself in hot liquid building, grid meltdown. All this below is thoroughly cooked. All this buried and flooded and melted in hot liquid building. Look at that. Turn that red brick into what looks like mud there. Sand. I mean, look. This is an arch, an arch, an arch. There's red bricks. That's the corner. Comes down. Columns, columns, columns. It all got turned into sand and dirt and mud and dust. Defied. Again, this is all buildings melted. It's coming up, forming A-frames. The heat from being submerged in this hot liquid red melted brick building, lava. It's just coming up. It's hot, and it's the roof. All this are just a bunch of houses and buildings, and it's just all melted. Look, all melted. Look, all melted from heat. Hot, submerged, melted, flooded. All flooded in liquid hot melted building. You can still see the brick lines and the arches and the towers and the columns and the domes, and it's all melted buildings everywhere you go. Look at this. All melted buildings, brick lines after brick line. Liquid building, hot, submerged, melted red brick. All hot, liquid, melted building and flooding other buildings and being turned into sand, mud, and melted. All submerged in liquid building. Look, that's all melted red brick and buildings and concrete. Look, flooded itself. And there's one of these little statues of the Sphinx. Human head, lion body. They had all these different beings, vessels. Didn't matter. And look what happened to the brick lines. Completely melted into the ground, downward. And this kind of looks like it was churning hot. It just took the brick lines and just started churning them up into like a circle. It was brick lines, cooking it. And again, it's not straight here. It's not level because it's been flooded by hot liquid melted building, just like this has. Flooded by hot liquid melted building from the grid meltdown. See the A-frames here? See this building here completely turned into dust and mud. And it was hot, melting. Again, this building is sinking into the ground because it got hot from the grid meltdown. And look, it's leaned into this house. It's completely digging into this house wall here. It's insane. I mean, all the evidence is compelling. Now, again, this is not mud. This is this building here, the top of the building, and that's just how far it got hot and melted this concrete. That's all hard as a rock. And it flowed. It's concrete. That's hard as a rock. It's a rock curtain. It formed a rock curtain. Again, look at the red brick, literally liquefied into what looks like mud. Again, mud didn't magically fly up to the top of the building. It's melted into it. It's just gotten melted by the X Factor event. And again, they're in here, all this liquid building, and they're in here mining it. And we'll get to that later, of how all these different things were created by the X Factor event. You got gold, crystals, quartz, coal, all kinds of different things from different heat and pressure of these buildings by the X Factor event were cooked. You have red brick literally crystallized, and they're mining it. Now, all the brick lines here, the heat was coming up from the bottom. All these buildings melted.